What are you reading, John?
So,
Is the answer still Plato?
if we're talking about a book specifically,
Mhm.
I am. I'm still reading Plato. It's quite a long dialogue.
It is a long book.
The Republic is very long. I've had to go back a couple times because Plato likes to go in these circles.
Yes.
And that are dead ends, like we talked about.
Mhm.
But what I have been reading a lot on,
Okay.
specifically, is the Great Schism.
Okay. I didn't know that's where we were going, but let's do it. Elaborate.
Because, I'm Greek, you're Italian.
Yes.
We know Greeks and Italians have always hated each other.
Still do.
In summation, and I'll get a little deeper in a second, but I literally think the Great Schism of the Christian Church is because Italians and Greeks hate each other, and they will never accept that they're literally the exact same thing.
It wouldn't surprise me.
So I looked, and there's a couple main differences.
Okay.
Everybody knows it's papal primacy.
Mm-hmm.
The Orthodox Church does not think that the Pope is infallible and that any man's word is actually directly the word of the Church, of God. And there's also some things with the Nicene Creed. Like, with more of the triune God sort of deal, there's just some real sort of theological differences.
Mm-hmm.
But the main difference that I found that's actually kind of cool, and I like the dichotomy, and there's a new thing between the Orthodox Church specifically has said that the Catholic and Orthodox Church aren't in direct disagreement, but they kind of complement each other, which is also very confusing.
Yeah, that is very confusing.
But the idea with the Orthodox Church, and the reason why they have all separate churches, is they say that the church is the body of Christ.
Mm.
The church is perfect in that way, and that each church individually resembles the body of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So they almost have like a federalist view of the church. You know what I mean? It's like kind of like all of these different churches are all perfect in their own way, and together they make up the church. Whereas the Catholic Church is
a more formal institution.
This universal ecclesiasticism, you know,
Yeah.
like where like they say like basically they say the Pope is directly descended from Peter, and Peter was given the keys to the church, and like and so therefore like that's the only thing. Because originally there was 5 patriarchs. There was Antioch. There was like an Egyptian. There was I think in somewhere in like eastern Ukraine. There was 5 heads of like bishops, you know, or archbishops. And then the one that was in Rome, obviously, as Romans tend to do, was like, I'm the guy now.
Yeah.
I'm the captain now. But when you really get down to it, I think
it's just the Italian drive to be better.
It is. It really is. And I do
without actually doing anything to deserve to be better, but to be considered better.
And I think that kind of came from like Paul really established like the church as we know it in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And he did a lot of that. He went to Rome, and that was where it kind of he branched out from there. Because I've been told a lot of the epistles, like the letters from Paul, you can read backwards. He started almost in Thessalonica.
Yeah.
Which is Thessaloniki, if you want to say it right, all the way up to like kind of Rome. Later he went back.
Gotcha.
But the main difference is between this like federalist approach and this like universal, like almost like authoritarian, like
like a very
singular approach.
Yeah,
to
like
it.
a hierarchy with a central point.
Exactly. And
that explains the Orthodox, like you have the Greek Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church.
And so their idea is that they should come together to decide, almost like in the way of the ecumenical councils, which is what it was before, is all of these patriarchs would come together and then decide.
Okay.
On canon, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas the Catholic Church, their idea is kind of that, like, there's a lot of fallacy, and there can be having these churches represented by almost like these separate states can kind of create issues, as often is when you have separate states trying to agree on
disagreements,
one thing. Yes, and the Orthodox Church says that what if you elect a pope, or a pope becomes pope that is wrong? And obviously, if you ask some Catholics, there's even some popes that have made wrong decisions.
Like a lot of Catholics are very critical of Pope Francis right now.
Exactly. He's very outspokenly in support of like
the gay shit. Yeah,
for lack of a better term. And that would be the Orthodox saying, well, there's no way that all 5 patriarchs would all agree on that specifically, you know?
Yeah.
And that, like, they say that the idea of saying that the only perfect is the actual Church of Rome in the Vatican is saying that all these other churches in themselves don't resemble the body of Christ as themselves.
Now, I have a question.
Yeah.
Would this ecumenicalism include non-Orthodox and non-Catholic Christian churches?
Not at all.
See, that's a criticism I have.
That is a criticism.
What about the Protestants?
See, they say the Protestants, because they don't respect They don't like Protestants. Orthodox hate Protestants, I think, more than Catholics do.
See, that's a new phenomenon though, because I remember reading somewhere that early on, like, people compared like Lutheranism to like a Western European Orthodoxy. It was an African Orthodox priest.
Early Lutheranism, most likely.
Yeah.
Modern, like Episcopalianism and like all of these other churches, no, because they've lost like that Orthodox tradition, which is very, very traditional and very focused on like these like less theological concerns and more like almost like the Jewish church. Like a lot of like my priests growing up would say that like the Orthodox Church is actually closer to the Jewish tradition than a lot of these Protestants.
Yeah.
Because of this, like they have a very strong like of that old school, almost like Jewish ideals, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you were talking to me earlier about how there's kind of like an early split in Christianity between like early Christians who identify as like almost Reformed Jews, like a continue, where there's like a split from Judaism, and there's the idea of a continuation from
like
Judaism.
this Second Temple Judaism.
Yes.
Where they still almost consider themselves Jews, but Jews that accept Jesus.
Yes.
Because they would say, and there's still some like those. They'd even say that like Jesus would have said, "I am a Jew," like I am Jewish, like if he was asked.
Yeah.
And they think the apostles would all say that. A lot of them do, you know.
Gotcha.
And that was one of Paul's issues, is that Paul wasn't a Jew, and so Paul is the kind of the one who was saying like we're not Jews now.
Yeah.
He said a lot of times that they were followers of him. He would call like Christians his followers, because there's even a part where he says those who follow Jesus, they claim to follow Jesus. He called them like the followers of just Jesus.
Yeah.
And that they in themselves were kind of saying that like they were getting the word from Jesus, and they don't respect this church that was established. It's very complicated. It's a deep dive I'm taking, because I'm trying to determine. I mean, obviously as Christians we want to find the true church. You know? And I think that it's all become muddied, and it's very difficult now. A lot of these things have been lost. A lot of these writings have been lost. I think that the Catholic and the Orthodox Church are both a lot closer to this idea of Christianity that Peter and Paul held.
Absolutely.
You know?
I definitely think that no religious institution can sustain itself for very long without a acknowledgement of a kind of ecclesiastical hierarchy.
Exactly. And then of course you got to see, like, I mean, the ones that rose to power. I mean, then that's what the Catholic Church will always say, is a lot of times like their rise to power was, I mean, God.
Yeah.
Acting through them, you know, and the Holy Spirit. And I mean, that's kind of what the Orthodox Church says as well. I think I could see in the future, like, possibly some sort of reunion of the two churches. I think that would be very powerful. And I think it would be good, especially in these trying times.
Once Russia conquers Western Europe.
Exactly, exactly. Because I think that, like, pretty much a lot of the theological values are identical, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I go to Catholic church and there's nothing different. It's literally the words they use are different, but the meanings are the exact same.
And I've even seen where some Orthodox, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know anything about Orthodoxy other than like some stuff that you've told me and some stuff I've explored on my own, but culturally I completely blank on it. Some Orthodox people, from what I've seen, when I was up in Ohio, I saw a church that had the Orthodox cross on it, and but instead of saying like, you know, Greek Orthodox, it said Eastern Catholic.
Yeah,
Church.
well, the name, the actual name of the Orthodox Church is the Orthodox Catholic Church.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. There's
Holy Apostolic and Catholic Church is in one of our creeds. Like Catholic means like universal and perfect. That's what the word means. So
they
like,
should work on that.
The church should be Catholic. Which, yeah, perfect, yeah, right. But I think that the differences are just so minute, and it's almost like a lot of the differences we see just between like Italians and Greeks, where they have the same food, they have almost identical culture, they had the same pagan gods.
They look the same.
They look the same, they act the same, they smell the same. If you've ever been in the room with a Greek or an Italian, and
they're all addicted to olive oil. Yeah,
Italians will tell you that Greeks smell bad, and Greeks will tell you Italians smell bad, and I'm like, a lot of it is just this crux of Western civilization, and they just like, it's like they're this Mediterranean idea, and the Italians are kind of attached to this Western Anglo like idea, like France and England, and then Greece is attached to like Russia and Turkey and Egypt, and it's like they are kind of being pulled apart, but it's like they together are the same thing, you know, and they were just happen to be metropolises of that time, you know. But I'm trying to really dive into this to find the true differences, but the deeper I go, the more minute the differences seem.
Well, I mean, honestly, for something like that, like two churches that are that are literally broken apart from each other and still maintaining this very similar, analogous traditions, that's obviously true. That like the more you look for differences, the less will actually present themselves. But honestly, what I've discovered in my kind of religious journey is that the more you look for differences in any expression of religion, the less you'll actually find.
Exactly. Yeah. When I know me and you spoke about it, one thing I do like about, I mean, sort of the Protestant church is that we have this image of the church of being like made of gold and these massive cathedrals and everything, but like in a way I've always felt a little bit off with both the Catholic and the Orthodox Church for that purpose. It's like, how much money and resources are we pouring into building churches and growing like the physical body of the church and not the spiritual body of the church, you know? It's
when
like,
effectively you just need a room with some chairs.
Yeah, you could have a tarp set up out in the woods.
And or literally just a place.
Yeah, like you could just stand around in a field, and like
Yeah.
I think that, I mean, that's what Jesus' ministry was. I mean, he would just find a hill and just, or go on a boat in the middle of the lake and have everyone stand on the shore and preach to them. Like, he wasn't saying we needed to build this giant monument, you know? I feel like that's kind of like a reestablishment of these like old Jewish ideals of like these like this.
If it looks nice, then that means it must have been blessed by God.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. And I do understand though that it does give some sort of.
It's like a ritualistic. It creates a separation from like, you know, outside of church to versus the, you know, you have stepped into a new world.
Well, and it gives it authority in a way.
Yeah.
To like someone who's walking up who isn't maybe as deep of a Christian as others would be. It's kind of like if you go to a courthouse and it's just like, it's made of like, it's got like vinyl siding, and then you go in and it's got those like square foam things in the ceiling. Where you go to a courthouse like I saw in the city of New Orleans, it's just made of stone and has these giant pillars. When you're walking in there and you've committed a crime, you are thinking this is something that is like higher and more powerful than me, and that's what you feel walking into the Catholic Church. But then you say, what are we doing with this? You know what I mean? Like, we can read the liturgy. We've all read the gospel. We've all read the epistles. I can sing the songs and do the dances, but it's like that millions of dollars we used. Like, I mean, I've heard of churches buying $5 million organs. And if our goal is to better humanity, is that really that $5 million better to get a nicer organ, or could we have fed like the hungry? You know?
Yeah, exactly. Done something more actually positive for humanity.
But so that's me. I'm studying the schism right now. Hopefully in future episodes I'll be able to talk further on that. I think it's something that's going to take me a while. But like I said, the more you get into it, as with a lot of religious studies, you will get more confused the further you get into it.
Yeah.
It's like I mean, the more you know, or the more you think you know, the less you actually know. But what are you reading right now?
I just finished reading The Exorcist, the book that inspired the famous horror movie, and that has gotten me down a rabbit hole that I didn't think I would be going down, regarding the Salem witch trials and early Puritanism in America. I picked up 2 books on Puritanism, one explicitly about the Salem witch trials, and then one more just about Puritanism in general. And then I'm also reading a Carl Schmitt book called Political Romanticism, which has been interesting, but I'm not that deep into it, so I won't speak on it. The Exorcist was incredibly good, though. And a lot of what I thought was very interesting about the book is not present in the film. If you've seen it, have you seen it?
I have not. I'm not a big horror movie person.
Okay, well,
I would like to watch it now.
Girl gets possessed by demon. Catholics come get demon out is the basic premise.
Okay.
And that's the movie is pretty straightforward with that, where there's not a whole lot of, you know, but the book, it draws on a lot of like the criticisms of traditional ways of dealing with things, juxtaposed to the more modern psychological approach. You know, we're talking about demonic possession, exorcism. So, you know, the modernist, the liberal psychologist will chalk up these historical events, you know, that because in every culture, every religion, all around the world, there are instances of a kind of possession by spirits outside of the body. So, you know, the modern psychologists, people like Freud and Jung early on, you know, kind of chalk this up to either like misdiagnosed schizophrenia or hysteria, or split personality is something that you know,
essentially
comes
renaming
Yes, exactly, and that's kind of the essence of the book is this. It focuses on obviously this family with this young girl who's possessed by a demon, but also this Catholic priest who's he's a trained psychologist. The whole book he wants this to not be a demon. He wants there to be some kind of answer,
and that is what correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of Catholic exorcists, they have to prove that it's not an actual psychological issue before they can even perform an exorcism.
That's his struggle. The whole book is up until the end, obviously. But that's his struggle. The whole book is this girl's mother is like, I've gone everywhere. I've talked to every doctor I can. They can't do anything for me, and they sent me to you. And the Catholic priest is like, well, I can't do anything until I can absolutely prove that there is no other reason for this. And eventually he gets to, the point where he has the evidence that he needs, and it gets approved. But the whole book, that's a long struggle for him, discounting, and it brings up some crazy psychological theories about like telekinesis and the ability for the mind to alter the physical world with enough stress and enough like visceral emotions, wherein the line between science and psychoanalysis and psychology is blurred so thoroughly with like the actual historical content in this book, between that line of like hard science and the traditional ways of dealing with things, that eventually what I got from it was and they mentioned this in the book, like, we don't know like why exorcisms worked, but they did work. And when you look at a world like what we have now, where people with schizophrenia are treated, but they're not cured of their mental illness. People can develop multiple personality disorder, but they can't be cured from it. And then you look back at the pre-modern world, and they could be cured from it with these kind of ritual,
I mean, you hear in the Bible, demonic possession, when it was described with Caesars and speaking in tongues and speaking to people that weren't there, and having multiple things, like we are Legion, I am Legion. Yeah. Like having multiple personalities, having multiple voices in the head. Yeah. And like that's analogous with many common mental illnesses nowadays.
It's just, it raised the question for me. It's like, as someone who's very critical of liberal modernity, who's very critical of the kind of like, liberal, hard materialist ideology that has developed in modern America specifically, but the modern West in general. When you take that critical approach, I feel like it is an obligation on your part to not take for granted the assumption that these early psychologists are making, that these things can't be what they have been thought to be for generations.
Like only materialist approach to something that is actually more of like a spiritual illness.
Yes, and something that, regardless of if you believe in, the ability for priests to drive out demons, they did it.
If it works, it works.
Yeah, exactly.
Like we can talk about it afterwards, but if it does work,
why did it work? How did it work? And what implications does this have? And that brought me to, like I said before, a kind of reanalysis of the Salem witch trials for me, because and I've just kind of started going down this rabbit hole, so I'm not going to claim to be an expert on any of this, but Salem witch trials are really weird. They're a weird part of American history, because the kind of the what you're taught in school is that this was either some malicious act on the part of the the government of Massachusetts,
patriarchal
attack. some kind of anti-feminist movement, or it was like an outbreak of hysteria, or there's the theory that it was an ergot poisoning in the wheat. None of that explains the amount of confessions to witchcraft. And one of the things you hear about, like, well, why, the question is asked, why are people confessing to this? If it's completely unfounded, why are people confessing to this?
And that they think they might be persecuted if they confess,
Well, yeah, exactly. And one of the common answers to that is that people who didn't confess were, more likely to get a guilty verdict, more likely to be executed than people who confessed, which isn't true in all the cases. Like, all of the recorded cases of trials against accused witches, that is not common. People who did not confess were, they either got a guilty verdict, and then that guilty verdict was rescinded by the governor, or they got a not guilty verdict and were let go. And people that did confess got out. You know, there are instances of them getting out of execution and being excommunicated from the church, but there are also more instances of them getting executed for the guilty verdict that they got because they confessed to witchcraft. You know, there's also instances of people, you know, not just being accused all of a sudden and having no prior allegations regarding them in terms of like act of doing witchcraft. There are multiple instances of people who have been accused of witchcraft multiple times prior to the actual Salem witch trials, getting accused again and then being tried for it. I'm just saying something was going on in Salem.
There's more than we've been told.
Yeah, or at least like we were talking about, like demonic possession and psychology, the tendency to assume that there is nothing supernatural or, you know, paranormal or whatever, however spiritual that however you want to refer to it, the tendency to assume that isn't present, I think clouds the potential to gain some kind of deeper understanding of it. I'm not saying that everyone accused in the Salem witch trials was a witch and deserved to be hung. That's obviously not true, but something was going on for it to,
and obviously they didn't have these
blossom
sort of,
like this.
Yeah, they didn't have the sort of like regulation that the Catholic Church does when dealing with things like this.
Yes.
Like they want to do it the right way, and they actually want to help people, from what I've read. And I think that, like, they're taking that material and spiritual and using it not only as a treatment, but I think what people have lost nowadays is the ability or the understanding as far as, like, getting sick in the first place.
Yeah.
People look at it as only material. They'll look at it as a chemical imbalance, which is a whole nother topic, which
Did you see the study where they did a study on the whole chemical imbalance thing, and it's just total pseudoscience?
There's no empirical evidence for
Yes.
any sort of chemical imbalance ever present in any human ever. They have never found an actual proof of a chemical imbalance. So we're giving people exogenous chemicals to treat the supposed endogenous chemical imbalance, which is not apparent. But we do that, but we also deny the spiritual things. Like, I remember being young and going to, like, I went to, like, a Harry Potter camp as a kid. At the Sojourner in town when I was a kid, because I liked reading Harry Potter, you know? And I think about things like that, and I think about, I mean, when I was a kid, I had lots of issues. I had lots of mental issues in a way that I don't have now. And I didn't get rid of those through therapy. Those weren't gone through drugs or through any sort of prescription, but it was through, I mean, finding God. And that makes me think about all of these things people don't really realize that they're inviting these demons into them, whatever you want to call them. But we look at the adopting of these illnesses, of these mental illnesses, only from a material aspect as well. Like, when you hear parents not letting their children watch certain movies or not read certain things or not be around certain things, and we used to think that, oh, it's just them trying to be a crazy parent, and that's kind of what we're taught.
You know, they're just trying to control their child.
Hyper-controlling, and they're this crazy puritanical person. But when you understand this, it's like you're trying to prevent your child from opening doors to allow things into them that are going to plague them.
And it's a process of normalization. Like, why is it normal for, you know, white American teenage girls specifically to go through a witchcraft phase? That's something that is new.
And I'm sure if we look at the statistics for those particular women who do those things, the rates of mental illness, I guarantee you, are much higher.
And also the rates of reading Harry Potter at a young age are probably, you know, I think there's a direct causal effect here.
There is.
Yeah.
When you look at children, then, I mean, yes. I mean, there is a common thing that, like, in Catholic schools, like, sometimes your kids will, and I think that's more to do with a socioeconomic factor.
Yeah.
But if you're exposing your children to witchcraft and these sort of things as a young child, and, like, these demonic images and things, exposing it
to them as a normal thing too, not something that you should be critical of, not something that you should be wary of, but that's just, you know, and it's the byproduct of this kind of hyper materialism that we've been talking about, where you assume that there is no substance to the things in question, to witchcraft, to you know, Wicca, to all that hoodoo voodoo bullshit.
You empower it.
And by that you overlook the potentiality that there is something negative.
So we're creating a spiritual illness that they don't even know is apparent, and trying to treat a spiritual illness with material means.
Yeah, it's the same as, like, you know, like Satanism, kind of becoming normalized in pop culture. The idea that, like, you know, like, I was in like a death metal scene when I was you know, a teenager.
Baphomet images.
And it's commonplace. You know, it's you want a cool shirt with a fucking pentagram on it. You want
what
the
is
upside
that doing
down
to your soul, having that on you?
Exactly. You know, and what is it? you know, just the lyrical content of these things.
Things
What
we're
is
singing, we're saying out loud.
Yes. What is the gradual effect of normalizing this kind of behavior?
And gosh, what was I going to say?
I don't know.
But I think that in modern day, a lot of the mental illnesses that we have added to the DSM, we're to I think the DSM-5 now, and like it's almost like a dictionary.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk to doctors. I was speaking to a doctor about this, actually, a religious doctor I know at church. He's an Orthodox man, but he's a surgeon.
Okay.
He
I was
said-
going to say, is this a religious doctor or a doctor
No.
who is religious?
A religious man who's a doctor. I just don't want to say anyone's names, but he was telling me that when he's very old now, but he was going to medical school in like I think the 80s.
Yeah.
And he talked about back then, they had just started adding all these illnesses, but he said in the 1970s, when you went to medical school, there was like 7 mental illnesses that you learned about. That's it.
Yeah, and I mean, if you read old,
these are like actual, like empirically like known mental, like post-traumatic stress disorder, which some would say still is demons, but like actual mental illnesses that like come about out of environmental material means.
Yeah.
All of these new things that are being added, like all of these different depression disorders and like pornography addictions and like gender ideology issues, like what has also increased is materialism and the denial of spirituality, the denial of God. All of these things have coincided with each other, and we look nowadays. I mean, the rates of mental illness have skyrocketed since the 1950s and 40s, and a lot of people attribute that to, kids aren't working as hard and they need to be in the field doing things, which I think plays a part. But also, back then, they weren't exposed to the things they're exposed to nowadays.
Exactly.
So they
I read a statistic today that 56% of white liberal women have been diagnosed with a mental disorder.
Yeah, and that's diagnosed.
Yeah, and that's they've gone to a doctor and the doctor has said they have a mental disorder.
Is it that literally just half of these women are like actually like just born that way, or is it that something they're doing is allowing this to take over them, you know?
Or even like the desire to have something wrong with them, you know?
Yes, and that's a whole nother thing where it's almost like you're more dignified in this culture if you're sick, and it's seen as like freeing in a way. For me to accept,
because then you can blame it's a replacement for God, because a religious person could say, oh, it's all in God's hand, you know, when something bad happens to them. But the new, you know, the new like religion of liberalism allows you to say, oh, well, it's I did this bad thing because I have a mental disorder. I have this negative behavior because I have a mental disorder. It casts the blame onto some other.
Scapegoating.
Yes.
And they refuse to think that they could not be depressed. Like if you talk to a lot of, that's one thing I have with a lot of people. The two that I really feel most strongly about in this aspect are depression and anxiety. Depression and anxiety are very real. Every single human on the planet feels them. But the moment you accept that I am a person with depression, I
have this rather than I am experiencing this currently.
Like, and we feel that way about happiness. Like, I feel like a lot of like the hedonistic aspects of our culture are people chasing happiness. Yeah. It's like they view happiness and depression and anxiety as like personality traits instead of like states of being that you can pass through. It's like I view happiness as similar to warmth. If I spent my entire life trying to be warm, I'm never going to feel like fulfilled, because it's a fleeting feeling, and that's how depression and anxiety are. But when you accept that I'm a depressed person and I'm always going to be depressed, and there's nothing I can really do about it.
That is a state of being for you rather than a temporary affliction.
It's just like sin. When you accept that, like, I am just someone who's going to be committing this sin, you've now accepted that into you, and you now like are taken over by it. You know? And I think, and a lot of like the pharmaceutical drugs that we take are just, I mean, they're blasphemy, and they're putting a Band-Aid on on the Titanic, you know? Like
exactly.
It's you're not solving the problem. If anything, you're making it worse. Because you're not ever actually treating it. Like, and that's why a lot of people will say, oh, well, you need to go to the gym, you need to eat healthy, you need to do these things. And these are like a lot of, I mean, the commandments and the things that like the apostles and Jesus would talk about. A lot of like the things that they would tell you to do, like what not to eat, what to do, to take a Sabbath day, to do these things, is to make your body and your soul healthy and to keep you in like alignment. Like we've talked about it, like keeping your humors in balance, you know?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It allows you to see more clearly and be more spiritually aligned, you know?
Rather than assuming that there's something wrong with you and then becoming dependent on some substance to alleviate a problem that might have just gone away had you with a minor lifestyle change.
Exactly.
You know?
And accepting that, like, yes, humans are inherently flawed, but there is always a way to fix it. And
there's
it's
redemption. There's
within
something.
You.
Yeah.
It's not outside of you.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing outside of you that's going to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I'd like to read that. I'd like to read that a lot. And that's one thing that like I've been interested with the Catholic Church as opposed to the Protestants. I feel like Protestants don't really speak on these kind of things a lot.
Yeah.
They'll talk about demons, but they won't talk about it in the very like Catholics take it very literally.
Yeah.
And Orthodox, we take it very literally. They
Mm-hmm.
talk openly about demons. They talk openly about like angels as the hands of God coming down to like.
And that's
things,
the
you know?
genuine Christian. I feel like that is the genuine Christian understanding of it. It's not something metaphorical. It's not something that you should take as like, you know, just a weird thing that people used to believe. It's an accurate description of a phenomenon in this world.
It is metaphysical, but it is real.
Yes.
It is literal.
Yes. I wanted to talk about what exactly a state is, how it functions, and why people need to drop this kind of I'll just say the libertarian idealism of just kind of getting, or even
Getting
an
rid of
anarchist
borders and states.
Yes, an anarchist idealism.
This is state in the notion we would in America call it a country, but a state as like a body, a governing body.
Specifically, yeah, a political governing body. But yes, and the reason I wanted to talk about this is because with the impending probably arrest of Donald Trump,
Probably like death in prison.
possibly very it's looking more like that every day. And we've talked about, you know, the attempt to arrest Trump as obviously being a politically motivated attempt rather than something that's, you know, born of a genuine concern for the judicial system and upholding law and order. We've talked about that before, and I still firmly believe that. But the way that conservatives have reacted to this blatantly political indictment and, you know, attempt to throw in prison is stupid. And I'm going to explain. But the first thing I'll say is that when you have a state, when you have a governing body that creates laws and is dedicated to enforcing laws, every law and thus every enforcement of law within that state body is political.
Yes.
It is. So there's no.
It's all enacted by the state.
Yes.
Law cannot be enacted by anyone but the state.
So any, whether it's, you know, your you know, petty theft all the way up to like embezzlement and, you know, or like mass murder, it's all political because it is an act by the state. So when people want to, you know, criticize the Biden administration for trying to throw Donald Trump in jail because it's a politically motivated charge, yeah, that's true, but it also is true in every instance. You can say that it's, you know, an unprecedented politically motivated charge, and I would generally agree with you, but it's not something that you can just not have in a society.
Yeah.
It's not something like all acts of the judicial branch are political. That's the Supreme Court is a political judicial, you know, body.
And if you want it to change, you affect political change. You don't just say that we can't use the laws we have. Like, there's a reason we have that. If we say that Biden is not allowed to persecute Trump he did break the law.
He broke a law, and like I said, I don't want.
Would we rather set a precedent where you can't persecute people who break laws, or would we set a precedent that if a president breaks a law, they will be
held accountable? And you can point out the hypocrisy of Biden doing the exact same thing earlier. I think that was the end of last year.
Yeah.
They caught him, you know, hoarding documents in a private, you know, facility, his home. You can point out the hypocrisy, but the accusation, the what you should be rallying for is a consistency. If you're going to, you know, if you're going to indict, arrest, and prosecute Trump for this crime, also do it for Biden. Or if you're not going to do it for Biden, don't do it for Trump. Which, I mean, obviously either outcome has negative consequences. And on the one hand, you know, Trump is going to jail, and so is Joe Biden, which is like, you know, it's like a win and an L at the same time. But on the other, if you take the other option and neither get prosecuted, then you've set up a precedent for, like you said, laws not being enforced. You know,
by political, and especially I think it's much more important for us to hold our executors, our leaders of state to the highest end of the law. It's like a police officer. A police officer should be held to a higher standard than the average citizen. I mean, that's just the idea.
He has a higher responsibility, and with that comes a higher expectation of behavior.
And if anything, I think it would create a lack of enthusiasm for the position, which I think the president should be the worst job in the world. Like, no one should want to be president.
Yes.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Like, that's a platonic idea. You should have to
be
force someone.
It should be a bird. The president should be Atlas, holding the world on his shoulders.
The only reason someone should want to be president is just out of the fear that somebody worse than him would be president. Like, that's the only, not because they want to enact change, or they want monuments built, or they want to be this amazing figure. Like, no. It should be a horrible thing, and you should have to force someone. I mean, what's the movie, Gladiator? I know that's a little bit fictitious, but the whole idea was that he wanted to go home to his farm.
Yeah.
But the only reason he ended up taking it was because he saw, I think it was Caligula, Marcus Aurelius' son, was a horrible dictator, and he was like, well, I have to do this now. I don't want to do this. And we've created it, and when you if you start allowing presidents to just get away with whatever and know that there are no consequences, we're going to get people who are horrible people.
Yes, that's what we have now. You know, presidents have been above the law for a very long time.
Colluding with other countries, taking bribes from other countries, starting proxy wars to spread agendas that are outside of even the actual American foundational qualities that we actually used to try to spread in the world, which is arguable as well.
Yeah.
And
along with the hypocrisy of the Biden administration in prosecuting Trump for a crime that the leader of the Biden administration also committed in a very short span of time, one would be very, very blind to not point out the fact that there is also hypocrisy in Donald Trump and his supporters here. When in 2016, what was one of the major rallying cries? We're going to throw Hillary Clinton in jail.
Because she leaked federal documents and she was sending emails on a private server.
And this goes to my main point.
You can't attack your political opponent. That's just wrong.
Exactly.
But we can run on the platform of attacking a political opponent.
And this goes to the point. One of the points I want to make in this, in that the state is always like we said at the beginning, the state and its judicial branch is a political institution. Laws are political. Every aspect of the legal system is political. The only distinction and the only thing that differentiates states in general, all across the world, is the specific constituency that they represent in their actions. Okay? And the reason Republicans in 2016 were totally fine with Donald Trump saying we're going to throw Hillary Clinton in jail, I wish he would have done it, but the only reason they were okay with that was because they felt that politically motivated judicial action was serving their interest. It was putting someone who they perceived as an enemy to the American people into jail.
Yeah.
And the only reason liberals who were against that kind of, we're going to throw Hillary Clinton in jail, lock her up sentiment in 2016 are all on board arresting Donald Trump is for the exact same reason. They feel like the government in doing this is acting in their interest. I think they're grossly misguided in that thought, but the point is, a state is only different from another state, even within the confines of one country, on the basis of who it represents. And in this instance, you have on the one side the Democrats representing the interest of international financial capitalists, and on the other side you have the Republicans, specifically Donald Trump, representing the interest of a vast swath of the American people and, indigenous national capitalists, which, there's...
Albeit there are issues with the Conservative Party in the United States.
100%.
Well, maybe not Conservative Party, we'll call them a Republican Party as they are. But
less liberal party.
If you're going to take a party that's not representing the constituents that are electing it, I mean, I'd rather pick it is a lesser of two evils argument, but I'd rather pick the one that's at least representing some American people,
Yeah, and the wider point, the broader point is that, Karl Marx has a quote, and I can't quote it verbatim, but it's something along the lines of, yes, you're persecuting us now, we accept this persecution, and when our time comes, we will make no excuse for the terror. And that's something that conservatives need to wrap their heads around, is yes, you're being persecuted. Yes, your opinions are being suppressed. Yes, your leaders, your popular leaders, are going to be thrown in jail. They're going to be censored. They're going to be prevented from speaking. But that isn't
But they don't
something that you wouldn't do.
In power, you give any of these conservatives power, especially, like, I mean, the DeSantises of the world, as soon as they get into a position, a federal position like that, you don't think that they're going to prevent certain people from saying certain things? I mean, the LGBTQ movement around DeSantis is already telling them what they can and can't say.
Yes.
And I'm not saying he's not allowed to do that, but to say that the other party is wrong for doing the exact same thing you're doing, just in the inverse.
I just beg the conservatives to say, when our time comes, we aren't going to make an excuse for it. Because right now you're bitching. That's all you're doing is you're bitching.
Stop
about
bitching. It's
real.
gonna happen.
Yes, you're bitching about
always
real
happened.
political situations that have existed since the dawn of time. Political dissenters have always been persecuted until they amass enough support to instate a new government with a new political base, with a new popular base.
Then persecute.
To then persecute the prior persecutors.
I mean, you see it even, I mean, it's like the Bolshevik Revolution, you know what I mean? Like, no one hated Stalin for persecuting other, like, the Tsarist, you know what I mean?
Exactly. There's an element in that in every, go back to the American Revolution. We tarred and feathered. Yeah, we tarred and feathered those motherfuckers. We killed them. We put them in jail because they had done that to us.
They're attacking their political opponents. I
Yeah.
mean, there was a common thing in the early days of the actual American Congress where they would walk in. It was called caning. Like Southern, like there was a Southern Democrat who came in and caned like a Pennsylvania senator, like beat him to like almost to death on the floor of the House. You know.
And that's real politics. Politics is a war, and that's something that conservatives, I don't think, have wrapped their heads around.
Lawfare.
Yes, it's Fred Hampton said that war is politics with bloodshed, and politics is war without bloodshed.
That's why we should enact things by political means.
Yes.
So we can avoid bloodshed.
Yes, exactly. You want to avoid that inevitable bloodshed, but you are going to come into conflict with other interests who want to suppress you.
The nature of a two-party system.
Yes.
I think also something that a lot of, especially conservatives, well, maybe not even conservatives, but people who specifically are in support of Taiwan and Ukraine don't realize what we're doing in Ukraine is telling this opposite state, represented by Vladimir Putin and his party, that what their constituents believe and they are enacting in their country is wrong, because not even our own constituents in our own country.
But just a very small minority of people centered in the West disagree with them.
Yeah, he chose to protect marriage between a man and a woman, Christian values, like all of these, like, honestly beautiful traditional values. And what we're doing in Ukraine is, like, we used to go to countries and say we're gonna, I mean, and this was very arguable, and I don't agree with that this is what we were actually doing, but we at least went under the guise that we were bringing liberty and democracy and democratically elected leaders to these countries.
Yes.
That's not what we're doing in Ukraine.
No.
They have somebody who, if you go 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and you look at any major news, especially liberal news publications in the United States, would say that Vladimir Zelensky is one of the most corrupt politicians to ever walk the face of the earth. And we're bringing woke ideology. That's what we're bringing to Ukraine.
Our military
That's what they're
support
fighting against.
Our military support in Ukraine was literally predicated on the legalization of gay marriage, these woke ideas.
And they don't want that. Russians don't want that.
No, Ukrainians don't even want that.
No
They
one-
just want guns, so they'll do what they have to do. But
And so in their mind, they're fighting a holy war against us.
Exactly.
We're bringing the devil to their doorstep. And we're not only allowing hundreds of thousands, I don't know the quite numbers, but a lot of Ukrainians, a lot of Russians to die, edging onto nuclear war, trying to, like, we're going to lose the US dollar as the Federal Reserve currency. All for what? So that we can bring gayness to Russia? Is that really what America has come to? That's the American values that we're trying to spread to the world?
Yeah.
Not liberty, not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but gayness.
and that goes into the recent with Pride Month, being we are in the liberal
White House lawn.
I don't even want to talk about what happened on
there's no American flag. They flew the new flag of the United States
is the Pride flag. Exactly.
It's, I mean, and I understand, like, it having a flag to the side if we want to represent some people, which that's such a large category. It's hard for that even to say, like, it represents all those people accurately if you talk to most people. But people don't, like, is that really worth, is these liberalist values, are they worth destroying America?
And
Essentially.
and most of the Western world along with it. Is it worth sinking the Titanic over
everything
this?
we've built?
Yes.
Like, literally. And that's what people don't realize. Yes, I do agree that during McCarthyism, like, one of the things that we kind of built McCarthyism on was that they were a godless country.
Yes.
They were persecuting Christians. They didn't
Yes.
believe in Christianity.
Yes.
Honestly, if there was a country doing that nowadays, I would support trying to help somebody, like, they're Christians inside, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And more of the fact of letting them come here. Christian refugees, I mean, should always be welcome in the United States. But if we're going to another country that's literally a God-fearing country and just instilling...
One of the most God-fearing countries on the face of the planet.
A very beautiful... Like, the Russian Orthodox Church is one of the most beautiful, like, strong, like, religious organizations in the world.
And they have it's not even like a separation of church and state thing for them. They have, the Russian Orthodox Church has vested interest in the Russian government. They have a sway over the Russian government itself.
As, I mean, and who said you can't bring religion into politics if we're religious people? That's where we derive all of our things from. But if someone were to come, if you would have taken the United States in the 50s and someone would have come to Mexico and tried to bring something that wasn't American values to Mexico, what the hell do you think we would have done? We would have steamrolled all of that country.
Exactly, and Mexico's a really good analogy. If Russia was putting military bases and nuclear weapons in Mexico, how long do you think that would last before we did something about it?
We saw it with the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Exactly.
That's exactly what happened. A godless country came here, and they were coming to try to spread in the American people's mind, at least, like, this materialism and this godlessness, and that's what we're bringing to the doorstep of Russia, and I don't blame them at all.
No.
And I don't want to lose, and we're basically too far gone at this point from an economic standpoint. Like, they're just separating from the dollar, because to them the dollar is just a way of bringing this godlessness into their country.
Yes, it's a tool for U.S. imperialism.
And they know that the last thing we have is the fact that that's the world reserve currency, and once that's gone, we're done. And then what do we have left? We have a country of people who can't have children. You know what I mean? We're one of the weakest. We have in our lifetime seen us go from the unipolar moment,
Yes.
to literally, like, the end of the Soviet Union, to now becoming literally the laughingstock of the world.
The entire world.
And we're perpetrating a war that's destroying us.
Yes.
Arguably just as much as this country. I mean, they're facing obviously more bloodshed and more death and more destruction, and that is horrible. And I wish it would have never happened. It's honestly one of the greatest tragedies of our time is the Ukraine war, and I don't think people really realize how devastating
A tragedy that, if we're gonna point fingers, was mostly our fault as well, though.
Almost if the U.S. had never intervened, this would not be happening. There would have been a peaceful talk. I mean, Ukraine would not have been able to do anything. Russia would have just literally walked across the border, or driven across on the highways that they built into Ukraine,
Yeah.
and just said, "You're Russia now,
Yeah.
and let's get out all of these corrupt officials. Allow the Ukrainian state to." I mean, what were the conventions that were held in Crimea? It was the conventions, like, it was like Soviet conventions were held there to determine, like, how the Soviet Union in the Eastern Bloc was going to be set up, was in Crimea. Like, it was like one of the strongholds of the Soviet Union was there.
Well, the connection to the Black Sea has been, massively important to that bloc.
And
that's
and arguably most of them, except especially Eastern Ukraine, would say that they're Russian to this day.
well, that was the whole impetus of Vladimir Putin invading, is that the Donetsk and Luhansk regions seceded from Ukraine and said, we're part of the Russian Federation now. And you can point all the fingers you want. You could say, oh, well, there were Russian, politicians, there were Russian military guys that were influencing their decision. They made the fucking decision still.
And I feel like that sort of, like, I don't want to call it like ethnocentrism, but like cultural, that this cultural nationalism.
It's
I
a
feel like
civilizational.
It's kind of, I feel like it's almost, and I haven't read quite as much Dugin as you, but I feel like it's kind of what Dugin is talking about.
Yes.
It's like the nation, like Ukraine, we can create that border, but it will still be in that Russian nation.
Yes, it's not. It's a line on a map. It's like how it's literally.
And it only negatively it harms Ukraine.
It literally, it's the same way we cut up Africa. That's basically what we did to Eastern Europe, and
Just
after the
creating
collapse
division.
of the Soviet Union is just create these almost arbitrary lines of distinction.
Creating a Western territory inside Russian cultural homeland.
Exactly.
It's
And
like
I feel like there's
like
an
if we just took Missouri
Yeah.
and made it like a Chinese, like Chinese sympathizer, which it's like we would have a problem with that. That's still America.
Yeah.
You can call it something else, but it's in the center of fucking
and
America.
Americans live there, and
You take
there's
Florida. Like Florida's gonna be American no matter what you do.
an argument to be made that maybe Western Ukraine should be not part of that bloc, but
That's for them to decide.
That's for Ukrainians to decide. You know, that's not for us. That's not for NATO to decide. That's not for, you know, anyone in the West to decide, except
like
for Western Ukrainians.
Like the Taliban.
Mm-hmm.
Because is it for us to go in and say that, I mean, if they have this massive support of like the indigenous population,
which they obviously did, given that they took over the country after the Americans left, they took over the country in a fucking week.
And we see it in I mean, it's not like the people were fighting back against it at all.
No.
You know, I mean, there were probably some people there that were getting a lot of money from the United States that were in support of the United States.
A lot of suit wearing, glasses wearing Afghanis.
And you look at what's the country? I think it's Uganda. Is the African country? I think it's
It is an African country. Yes.
But they're the ones they're getting a lot of flack right now for being very anti-LGBTQ.
Yes, and I think it is Uganda. Yeah.
They're now receiving support from China, financial support from China to build infrastructure. But because China said, "Hey, we'll give you money. You just trade with us. We'll set up a fair trade deal so that it benefits you and it benefits us. You guys have a lot of natural resources we'd like. We have a lot of ways. We have a lot of technology we can bring to you and infrastructure.
We can help you industrialize, and you can help us just generally. And
then we'll be partners."
Yeah.
America says, "Hey, we'll give you money, but you have to fly pride flags. You have to adopt our ideology.
You have to wear. It's colonialism.
You have to not be Uganda anymore."
And that's where like the leftists fucking lose me. Is like, I'm for anti-colonialism. I'm for, you know, standing up against.
Let them fucking be them. Not
yes, exactly. You know, you want these Africans with these traditional values to submit to your values that were literally concocted in Harvard and Yale and these centers of white Western hegemony. You know, you want these values to supersede the actual indigenous values of these African nations.
It's cultural colonialism, but it's not even American culture. It's this new global culture of pride, of the worst of the mortal sins is pride. You know, like literally.
That was one of the base things that Jordan Peterson's like really hit or miss for me, but one thing that he's
almost like an Andrew Tate figure in a way for me. Like some stuff I'm like, come on man, but then other things I'm like, that I can take that out of context.
Exactly. But that was one of the things he pointed out about Pride Month, is that this is Pride used to be something you had to be ashamed of. It was supposed to be something that if you had it, you had to suppress it and not be open to, like, pride in anything.
Traditional value is modesty.
Yeah. Exactly.
And like that's what we see, like even with like, and that's what we're trying to bring to these countries. Like, and really that's what we're getting, the pushback we're getting from China, from Russia, from the Middle East, from these African countries. Really, what do we have now is Western Europe. I mean, even Brazil is now, I mean...
It's literally the United States, Canada, Australia, and Western Europe. And even Western Europe, we're losing grip.
The weakest countries in the world.
Yes.
By any stretch of the imagination. The only thing we have is that culture we had. But the American culture that we were built off of was not this new culture that, like, we spread. You know what I mean? We spread this idea that, like, everybody should have a steak on the table. Everybody should be able to eat. That was what people wanted.
True republicanism was the dawn of America. Everybody having property.
People wanted American comforts. They didn't want this crazy ideology.
Yes, they wanted to live in their own. You know, every man a king of his own kingdom. You know, that was America.
And we don't even have that in America.
No, now you have, you know, massive apartment blocks where everybody's, you know,
no one owns a home. No one owns anything. And like, I don't know. I don't know what to do at this point. It's honestly like it's weird. Like I am an American nationalist. I'm a patriot. I love America. I will die defending this country. But what do we do as Americans when our state is basically gone and part of this global collective? Basically, what do you call it? The Atlantic bloc or whatever.
Atlantis.
And I support Russian freedom. I support. I'm against the Ukrainian government right now. I support China and China's annexation of Taiwan, or what is it called? Reincorporation of what basically is China still.
Yes.
I support these African nations that if that's what they want, and if one of these African nations wanted to be the LGBTQ androgynous nation, I don't give a shit. That's up to them.
Yeah.
If they vote on it and they want that and that's what they do,
even if the vast majority of American citizens wanted that, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it. I would have my arguments against it, and I would try to make that not the case. Yes, but it's not the majority of American people. It's a tiny minority,
and that's really what I think is one of the worst parts that we've been told, is like people think that it's this overarching thing, and it's like most of the people who subscribe to this are being forced to.
Yeah.
Because they'll be attacked by this minority that has gotten power.
It has massive amounts of power.
It's like tech elites, it's corporate elites, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I was reading last night, or I was watching actually a video about the pornography industry.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this one company, they're called Mind Freak. Or Mind Geek. They're a Canadian company.
Okay.
They own, if you search like porn on Google, the top 20 websites are all owned by them. Like, they're not even just through like these other means, but through things like that. They're putting this liberal like culture. They're spreading it all over our country. You know what I mean?
Just demoralizing and desanctifying everything.
They are worth Mind Geek is worth $100 billion. They're worth more than the NBA, the NFL, the MLB, and the Major League Soccer.
Mm-hmm.
They're like 5 times more wealthy than that, and like
It's porn.
porn is over half of the internet traffic in the United States is for porn, and this is what they're trying to resist.
Yes.
Is like we're a country ruled by hedonism and liberalism and like,
Perverts.
and it's what destroyed this country.
And you look at a country like China or Russia or Iran, and they put restrictions on, like, porn is illegal in China. I'm not sure about the status in Russia, but I know there are some restrictions on it, especially, you know, I know up front that they don't allow like public displays. They have laws against the promotion of homosexuality and you know,
and even just public displays of affection.
and let's not even talk about Iran, because there's no question there, you know.
Exactly. And it's like, and if you and I very much agree that the founding fathers were against things like that. Like the idea that founding fathers were free speech absolutists.
No,
They believed in free speech, but there's a time and a place, and they didn't like. There is, what is it called? I think it's called loquaciousness or something. It's like lewd behavior.
Yeah.
Like they would not have allowed that.
And even on a political level, to bring it back to talking about Trump, the first real act of the American government was the suppression of a rebellion. You know, with the Shays Rebellion.
Yeah, Shays Rebellion, and then there was
the Whiskey Rebellion too.
The Whiskey Rebellion too. Yeah.
Yeah, like that. Those were the founding acts of the American government. Aside from, again, the American Revolution, which was a suppression. You know,
George Bush II. You know what I mean? Bush II. Was his father's name?
HW.
HW. Yeah.
The guy who did
more
9/11.
More recent one.
Yeah.
He literally had a woman arrested for being like a pornographer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's very recent in America that we're allowing like all of these things to be very mainstream.
Yeah.
Like, for most of the like American like history, we were against porn. Like, that was like one of the feminist like ideas of feminism in the 60s was against the porn industry, against prostitution, because I mean it takes away rights. It takes away people's righteousness.
Again, to bring it back around, that's the criticism I have of libertarians. Is like, so you want less government intervention. I understand that our government is bad. I understand that there are things that our government does that I am opposed to on like a deep, visceral, spiritual level. But for me, when you say you want less government intervention, we have that. We live in, you know, and this is really controversial, we live in a society run by anarchists that want to do whatever they want. They want to be able to do whatever they want. They want no restriction. And I can't,
values.
Yeah, I can't abide by that. That's the logical conclusion.
Moral apathy.
Yes. To instate a society with morality, the state has to take action to prevent the spread of immorality. Yes. That's what laws are. That's why murder is illegal. That's why stealing is illegal. Because if you don't have those things illegal, then they will cultivate and they will spread and they will become, you know, more commonplace.
And this idea that it's a nation's duty to make you happy is ridiculous.
No.
Who the fuck thinks that your purpose in life is to be happy or to be able to do whatever you want? It's not your nation's duty to just let you do whatever your heart's desire is.
No, a state exists to protect its citizens
and to provide like safety and to help you with things that you need to survive. You know, like, and if something you're doing is directly against that, like, I mean, we're destroying, I mean, the American respect. I mean, our economy, like our education system, like everything that made America strong is being destroyed by these values. So is that not like a treasonous behavior? Like, is that not directly against like the whole idea of having a governing body?
Yeah.
Like, if we're destroying all the values and everything that, I mean, I mean, I think we're inches away from legalizing pedophilia in certain places. You know?
Well, I mean, there was that NATO document I showed you that was like that was talking about how like at the bare minimum the age of consent should be lowered.
Yes. They want to rewrite the Bible with AI. The World Economic Forum, WEF, they say that we should rewrite the Bible using AI to find a more true religion for the globe.
See, I genuinely think that when the Antichrist comes, it will be in the form of some kind of artificial intelligence.
I think people are talking to demons through AI.
That's probably fair too.
I think that, I mean, because it's a material, like God. Mm-hmm. It's not God. Like
it's the Antichrist.
It's the Antichrist.
It claims to be God.
Satan is the Lord of the material.
Yeah.
And it's and just the rejection of the idea, like even that alone, for someone to hear that, like if you would have told Thomas Jefferson or George Washington, like we're gonna rewrite the Bible using this fancy dancy technology, like they would have shot you dead in front of them.
Oh,
a branch just fell out of the tree.
Okay, we are outside.
But it is like WEF, like the World Economic Forum, like all these global organizations, NATO, like that is the new government.
Yeah,
there's no United States anymore.
Yes, and their flag is the fucking pride flag.
And the pride flag represents like the destruction of all values. It's the postmodern nation.
Yes,
like the post everything. Like we are just going to deconstruct everything toward nothing means anything, and no one can agree with each other. Like there's a new thing too with immigration. To get back to the topic at hand of a state and what a state is, this idea that we should let anyone into the United States, regardless of what they believe, regardless of who they are, is ridiculous. You come here to subscribe to our values.
And it's also something that has never existed.
Never existed. You come to our nation, and the idea that, like, if you come to America, you should have to learn English and speak English. Mm-hmm. Oh, well, you're a racist. No, I'm a fucking American, and we speak English. Yeah. This is the American country. You come here, you're to be an American. Mm-hmm. You don't come here, you don't come from wherever. I mean, you don't come from France to come here and try to make this France. You know what I mean? You come here to be a United States citizen, and therefore you should subscribe to our values. You don't come here to change our values.
And the thing is, a lot of the hard-working foreigners that come into this country to make good lives for themselves, they understand that.
Yes.
They understand that they want to be Americans. They want to participate in this culture, and they might not like some aspects of it, and I think they're right to not like some aspects of it. You know, I've interacted with a lot of Arab immigrants, and they, first and foremost, being in America, love America. They love the idea of America. They love the opportunities that are offered for them when they work hard here. But they, you know, what they're critical of are the same things that conservative Republicans are critical of. They are like, why are they teaching my kid how to be gay in school? Why are universities pointless and retarded? Like that's what they're critical of.
We're creating all of these like infinite amount of subsects of these different American ideologies, as we call them, of all these different people that are allowed to have their own ideologies, and we have no cohesive idea. Like the whole idea behind the United States was that you can't look at someone and tell if they're a United States citizen. Mm-hmm. We all look different. We all come from different places. Our voices sound different. You know what I mean? Yeah. But the thing that made you American was those traditional values, those
and
American
participating
values.
in a objective state.
Yes,
you're that's the importance of a state.
And when you reject that, you've lost what made you American.
Exactly.
Because we want to make the things that make us American our differences. It's this whole new thing that diversity is our strength. Diversity is not the strength of a nation. It's actually homogeny. Yeah. Like homogenization is the strength. And I'm not saying that we all have to look the same or we all have to act exactly the same or have the same religion, but homogenization of values.
And like I said, a participation in the same institutions.
That we respect America.
Yeah.
And we're not trying to just destroy America. And that's what we have nowadays. That's almost like it's like you decide how you want America to be. You decide how you want America to be, and that's wrong. And that's why we have no cohesion. We can't decide anything. Like it's like a house divided will always fall.
And I have a special problem with leftists who embrace this kind of open borders ideology. Leftists, people who call themselves socialists, people who call themselves communists, embracing open borders. Like, do you think the Soviet Union had open borders?
You could just walk in and out of.
Yeah. That's what you could do. You could just do whatever you wanted in the Soviet Union. You know, Cuba. Any socialist
you still can't
state.
Go to Cuba without a certain thing, you know.
Mm-hmm. North Korea is a prime example of that in modernity. Even China, you know, you have to have a reason to go to China. You have to, and if you're a Chinese citizen, you have to have a reason to leave China.
You can go to Hong Kong, but you can't get out of there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if you want to leave and go into actual China, You've got to have a reason. And if you do, they're going to be watching you.
Yeah.
Because they're protecting their nation.
Yes.
They're protecting their people and their values.
And people criticize, like, the right-wing criticism of existing socialist states is appalling to me, because for all intents and purposes, these states are what you want to turn America into. You know, you think that foreigners should just be able to come into your state and do whatever they want and have no concern for any of the, like, indigenous values of the state. You think they should be able to interfere with your government. You know, you oppose foreign intervention into your state, but when North Korea does it, it's bad. It's crazy. It's evil. It's like, and you know, people like DeSantis who you know, I'm not even just DeSantis. Literally, I would say 100, if not 100%, 99.9% of Republican politicians say they stand up for family values. They say they stand up for traditional values. They say they stand up for Christendom. You know, the spread of Christianity, the authority of God. They say all of these things, but then all of the states that actually, you know, have strong patriotic populations that can practice their own indigenous religions, that can do, you know, that can be proud of their country. All of the states that are actually doing that, Iran, Russia, Afghanistan now, China, all of those states that stand up for traditional values and the authority of the government, law and order, all of these Republican talking points are the ones that they want you to fucking hate.
Yeah, because we want to destabilize them.
Mm-hmm.
As they're destabilizing, as we're just destabilizing ourselves. And like we talk about places like Afghanistan, and we're like, well, these crazy Islamic organizations are being tough, and they're instituting law and order because you need a foundation to build a society upon. It's like Iran. I know back in the day, I mean, they were becoming not westernized, but they were becoming modernized. They're a modern nation, but you have to give a nation time to do that. And they can't build you can't build a modern nation on these ideals that we have.
No.
And we're a modern nation that's crumbling from the top down because of these values. And we want these other nations, we want to institute those same values and have them build everything on top of that. We didn't. That's not how it works. If we brought the founding fathers nowadays, we would call them Christian extremists.
Yes.
We would call them at least like Abrahamic extremists.
They would be the American Taliban.
The Al Qaeda, you know what I mean?
Oh.
And how people have been lied to, or just are so ignorant to not understand that. Like the American values were not. It's not Locke, Hobbes, and Rousseau. Yes, there were some ideas. There was a few sentences taken from each of them. You know what I mean? The social contract was taken. I think it's Montesquieu or whatever.
Yeah.
But most of our values came from ancient, like, Platonic philosophers that held these almost Christian values.
Yeah.
And Christianity.
And then actual Protestant Christians mostly.
The number one text cited in all of the Federalist Papers, in the Bill of Rights, and in the Constitution is the Bible. Cited. Like, not taking things, literally cited word for word. I said it before, the Liberty Bell has a quote from Leviticus on it. Yeah. The Liberty Bell. Our liberty is given to us through our belief in God and our belief in these values.
Even on our dollar bill, in God we trust.
Yeah.
You know?
In this nation, there's no one above Joe Biden or the CIA or whatever. There's a man. In Russia, above Putin is God.
Absolutely.
And he is trying to instill, yes, he might be a little bit of a thug. Who isn't? Who can rise to that state?
What strong leader isn't a little bit of a thug?
I want us to have a thug, and I want him to beat up other people who threaten our values.
Exactly. Again, that's the role of the state.
Yes, is to inflict their will.
Yeah,
the will of the people.
Exactly, and that's the distinction I made at the beginning. It's about who the state represents. Right now, our state represents, like we said, this transnational globalist elite. NATO, and the pedophiles that run it.
Yes.
And what Republicans want, without them realizing it, is a state that represents the people and that enacts the people's will, and that does so on occasion, when necessary, through violent suppression.
Communism.
Well, yeah, but that's the pill that most people aren't ready to swallow.
I think communism could use a rebranding. Like, literally, just if I feel like you could pick a different word and just literally say everything that you would normally say about communism, and like most Republicans would be like, yeah,
exactly.
Or conservatives, at least.
Here's my take on that, because personally, I am a strong believer in what Karl Marx said, in that a communist disdains to suppress, to hide his beliefs. A communist doesn't want to not proclaim himself a communist. what you have in America is a culture that was raised and bred on McCarthyism, but it was a McCarthyism against a foreign government, the Soviet Union, and an indigenous communist party, the Communist Party of the United States, the CPUSA, which still is around, that was more beholden to that foreign power than it was to the American people.
And do you think that do you think in a way the Soviet Union did become a little bit misguided and not represent their constituents by getting rid of religion as a whole?
I think that was that was one of the main failings of the
Because
Soviet Union. That was like that was their original sin that led to their downfall.
Anyone who's met a natural-born Russian, they're very religious people.
Yes.
Like, to take that away.
Mm-hmm.
But continue.
But McCarthyism is based on the real perceived threat of the Soviet government in Russia, and like I said, the indigenous Communist Party that is more beholden to that, foreign government than it is to the American people. And because of that, it's not Americans who are ignorant about socialism and communism that are to be blamed for anti-communism. It is the Communist Party of the United States that is to be blamed for not appealing to the American people. And
actual American values.
Yes, and I think that it's very easy for an American who considers himself a communist and who is actually doing it, who actually understands, Marxism. I think it's very easy for him to win over a conservative, a more traditional conservative who is reluctant to embrace. You see it even
embrace
with
American communism, not Soviet communism, Russian communism, American communism.
Yes, and you even see it with the MAGA movement. And Trump's meeting with Xi Jinping was something that conservatives applauded, and it's still Xi Jinping, the leader of Communist China, the head of the Communist Party of China, is someone that conservatives, while occasionally they get misguided on, broadly, if you asked them about it and talked to them for long enough, they generally don't have a problem with him at the very least. He's a strong leader for the Chinese people. They don't want him to rule America, and that was the same problem that McCarthy tapped into, is that you don't want this. As an American, I don't want the Soviet government to run America. I want an American government. And that was what McCarthy
an American government
into.
For the people of America.
Yes.
Not for these corporate elites or these global elites,
yes,
like what we have nowadays, which is, I think, the idea behind not being a completely laissez-faire government. Because a complete laissez-faire government, when you have open borders, you allow any business or anyone to come to your country and enact change politically and economically from anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
You are going to have elites, corporate elites from other countries come here and change things. Yeah. And we're now a country ruled by people who are inherently not even American.
Yeah.
Or not even, or they might be from America but don't represent America.
And they don't even identify as Americans. They see themselves as citizens of the world. They see themselves as members of an international community. You hear them say these things more so than you hear them say, "I'm an American. I stand up for Americans." They are literally globalists.
Corporate globalists. And I think people have this idea of China, when they think about China as being a communist nation, as people just working in the fields and like bread lines and all of this stuff, and that there's no competition. They do have competition. Mm-hmm. They do have some laissez-faire values,
especially on the local level.
But they make it to where it benefits China.
Yes.
It only benefits China. They compete with everyone else. They choose things in China. Yes, they might say, this is going to be our chip producer for China. This is
and
going
you
to be
need to produce X amount of chips, because that's
we're
what we
now
need.
Going to compete with all the other chip producers to make China the best at this, so that Chinese people we can bring that money into our nation.
Mm-hmm. And one of the policies that China has in regards to corporations is that on the board, they have CEOs, they have a capitalist class in China, and on the board of all of the seats of these corporations, there's a Chinese Communist Party member. Now, if you're a conservative and you don't want Target promoting gay shit, then maybe you should have a member of a government that actually stands for your values sitting on the board at Target and saying you can't produce that gay shit, instead of doing a boycott that's going to last a month.
Because all these people that work for Target or that work for Bud Light, all of these hardworking American families that have children, that have mortgages to pay, that have bills to pay, are screwed, because this corporate elite is subscribing to values that are not American.
Yes.
That was one of, yes, I was against the Bud Light thing. I think that it was, in a way, it shows that they're targeting a class of people that's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the American population.
Mm-hmm.
But the saddest part to me was the supply chain, like the people in the supply chain that lost out because of that.
Yeah,
and that might have lost their jobs.
You have
or
local
not made money.
You have local producers, local businesses
that had
that
no
are
effect in that. They didn't make that, but they're the ones feeling the hurt.
Yes, Bud Light's going to make it through. Even with the drop in sales, even with the drop in stock, they're still going to make it through.
The corporate elites, they're already, they could lose their job and never make $1, and they're still fine for the rest of their lives. It's these hardworking Americans
that are suffering
that have no effect on this,
mm-hmm.
and there's no one representing them at that level. It's people who are not, in my opinion, American. You know, like they don't care about the average American, but they have now, like with Facebook and Twitter and these large companies, they have such a large effect on the American population, but they don't care about American values. It's like, how can we allow a company like that to have that big of an effect where literally people are going to be like starving and losing their homes, and like their children are going to be like having to like relocate to other places, to cheaper places, and our government just says, oh well, we're laissez-faire, we can't get involved with that. It's just our people are just screwed because of what these ultra rich elites did.
Exactly. It's like the East Palestine train accident.
Yeah.
A whole city is fucked now. A whole city has to relocate, or is going to be dealing with birth defects and lung diseases for the rest of their lives. A whole city, and our government is doing nothing. Our government, China, can build new cities. When was the last time you heard of that? When was the last time you heard of that in America?
Do that.
A new city being built.
Trump
That's
is the
insane.
only one I've heard it.
Exactly. Exactly. Trump is.
Why
the
does he
only
want to
one.
do that? He doesn't want to do that so that like his company can make money, or he can give money to his friends. He wants to do that so that hardworking Americans can move there and buy houses for cheap, and they can make money off of building their own city and feel connected to something.
And one of the things that conservatives don't get when they think about this whole thing is what the Soviets did. That's what Mao did. It's
That's
land
not it.
reform.
Yeah.
You're taking land that's owned by these multi-billion-dollar corporations, BlackRock, Bill Gates, all of these massive, vast swaths of American land that are being used for nothing and are owned by like a handful of people. You're breaking them up and giving them to American families to live on.
And what do you need for that? You need a state.
You need a
that
state.
can enact the will of the people. And can forcibly take things from these corporate elites.
Yes.
Because, I mean, the land they have is being protected by American tax dollars. You
Yes.
know? Like, the idea that's not the government's ability to take that away from them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's ridiculous. I mean, all of the wealth that they've created is off of the backs of the American people.
Yes.
It's ridiculous. Like, I don't think that, like, yes, like, we should take all the money in the world in the country and just divide it exactly evenly.
No, but that's not what any socialist state has ever done.
It's not what's happening in China.
No.
There's people at the bottom and there's people at the top in China, but they're closer together, and they're trying to make it to where people don't starve, and like
Yes,
people have
poverty
things.
has consistently gone down where it's increased in America.
And yes, the top has gone down a little bit.
Yes.
The richest people are not as rich as they might have been if it was a completely capitalist society. But is it sustainable?
More so than at least our system. Well, I think we've hammered this home enough. You want to move on to?
We beat this horse past death.
Yes. You want to move on to current events? I know there's a couple things you wanted to talk about.
Okay. One of the things I wanted to talk about, and we actually mentioned it earlier. I know BRICS. So BRICS is like this new multinational organization. It's like Brazil, Russia, India, China.
Yes.
I think those are only the four.
I think
There might be some smaller nations involved, but those are the main ones.
Those are the main ones.
They're meeting soon to discuss a new global reserve currency that is not going to be the American dollar. They're going to create a new bill that they use between them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, therefore, the way I understand it, I may be slightly wrong, but I think it means that we're going to have to pay off our debts to all of the countries that we owe American dollars to.
Yes.
Because the American dollar is now going to be basically worth nothing on the global scale.
Yes, and people are predicting inflation rates of up to 30% because of this.
2.6% higher than the Great Depression, than in 1931, I believe.
Oh my God.
And I think this is something that people don't realize is actually going to happen, and they don't realize the effects that it's going to have, and they don't realize the cause. The cause is American intervention in Ukraine.
Yes.
When Trump was president, we were brokering deals with Russia, and we had a possibility of being an economic superpower that could match that of China.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would have some sort of leverage in a global state to actually stay relevant.
Yes.
And stay not a third world country
Yeah,
or a second world country.
Yeah, stay capable of actually having some kind of sway over international politics.
If we lose the fight for the world reserve currency, which is looking like we are going to, we're heading for a very tough time.
Yes.
In the following decade.
And not a tough time in the abstract sense of mild inflation, a tough time in the very real, very, persistent threat of actual internal impoverishment.
2008 will look like a mild recession.
Yes. 2008 will look like a little blip on the dot,
We will be in the second Great Depression, but instead of global depression, it will be a solely American depression.
And instead of a vast pool of natural resources that are being constantly utilized by an industrial, base in this country, an industrial and agricultural base in this country, it will be McDonald's and Chick-fil-A and fucking several gas station chains that are the base of our internal economy.
And your cheeseburger will be $30.
Your cheeseburger will be $30, and in a couple years, it'll maybe be made out of like rats.
We'll be eating crickets, just like the World Economic Forum wanted us to, man. Which, to my point, is why something we hamper on a lot is building a community framework to where you can support the people that your family, and the people you love is the only way to get through a time like that.
Yes.
People got through the Great Depression, not because they had good jobs, not because they had a lot of money in the bank, because Lord knows that's not going to be worth anything.
No.
It's because they knew how to take care of themselves. They could grow and produce food.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a community framework. You have to have people with different skills in a community that are committed to taking care of each other.
Yeah, when that global supply chain breaks, do you know how to pick up a rifle and go to the woods and get some fucking food? That's something that people have lost touch with in this country.
Do you know how to skin a deer? Do
Yes.
you know how to process meat? Do you know how to store meat without electricity?
And something that is going to be equally important coming through this is, are you going to blame your government or are you going to blame China and Russia? Because that's the decision that a lot of American people are going to have to cope with. Is your politicians, your Republicans, Democrats, and most people in between are going to tell you that it is other countries' fault, that it's BRICS' fault, that it's China's fault, and that the solution is further destabilization, further, aggression against these countries in order to reestablish yourself as a military hegemony. Are you going to believe them, or are you going to accept that this was the result of your government's actions, that this was the result of your country's actions or inaction, that the suffering that you're going to face is something that was brought upon by your ruling class rather than some abstract enemy overseas?
There's that.
Yeah.
I think we did touch on it earlier. Trump is probably going to spend the rest of his life in prison. I don't think that really needs to be touched on anymore at the moment until we see what happens with the trial.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any other? I know you had a couple of points.
Yes. I'll get rid of the one that's not a meme first. China is now attempting to broker deals between Palestine and Israel, and they seem to have committed to the establishment of an independent Palestinian state in the region. And, lots of people have come out in support of Palestine. Lots of governments have come out in recognition of Palestine as a legitimate, as having legitimate claim over, the East Bank. But not at this scale. And when you look at what China was able to accomplish between Saudi Arabia and Iran, countries that have been, at a not open conflict, they've certainly had open conflict in the past, but have been basically enemies in the Middle East for the better half of, the past 50 years, 60 years. This looks like something might actually change. It's going to be harder than Saudi Arabia and Iran because Israel is far more embedded in, the Western sphere that China is kind of beginning to stand against.
Palestinians are very angry.
Yes, and so there's a lot more tension there, but I think it's a good sign. And I'm
as
looking.
Long as the U.S. doesn't intervene somehow.
What with what? We sent all our shit to Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I think China's actually playing this really smart, because I think China is recognizing with Ukraine, with the kind of warmongering over Taiwan, they're recognizing that the U.S. government is playing a game that is inherently unsustainable, and also that they can play the game better.
And for much longer.
And for much longer, and without spending as much money and time and manpower. And that's what they're trying to do.
It's almost like China wants other countries to be successful as well.
Yes, you know, they actually, it's almost like they're actually promoting like peace and harmony and prosperity in the world, rather than doing the exact opposite.
Like almost like Christian values.
And that's all on that. I think that's actually, you know, a little glimmer of hope in this very dark world we live in.
There's always a silver lining.
Another arguable glimmer of hope is, and I'm sure this is something we can talk about for a little bit too, the Unabomber has died. Ted Kaczynski has died. Rest in peace, or rest in piss. I don't know yet.
I saw a joke that it was like someone sent out invitations for his funeral and no one wanted to open them.
No, but it is you know, as someone who's like been an edgy teenager before, it's like I was thinking about it earlier today, and I was like, it's like you had a movie that you really liked when you were a kid, and then you watch it as an adult and you realize it's a terrible movie.
Yeah.
But you still kind of like it.
You appreciate some of the things you took away from it.
Yes, you appreciate, you know, the point that it served, and it reminds you of a simpler time when life wasn't so complicated.
We both had our run into the woods and live off the land phase. You know?
Sometimes you just think like that, and I do think that there is value in some of Kaczynski's writings. There's also a lot of garbage and autism, but something.
As in most manifestos.
Yes, you know, he was definitely in the woods for way too long, and he was definitely also tortured by the CIA for way too long. I
do believe that a lot of this could have been prevented without dosing someone with LSD and having a team of lawyers interrogate them.
Yes.
But I do look on the Ted Kaczynski's writings in a way I look at it the same way I look at a lot of libertarians. It's like you see a problem, and your idea for the problem is to just like escape from it.
Yes, it's a utopianism. It's like this. You correctly identify.
You're not doing anything about it.
You correctly identify some of the problems, but then you just skip the part where you figure out how to fix them, and you just imagine a world where those problems weren't real.
A lot of conservatives have the same idea. Even liberals have this idea where it's like we should revert back to this like almost like the river tribe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we're just gonna live off to the land and go back to just being this utopia in the woods, which is impossible.
Physically impossible.
And even if it was, it should not be done. There's no need for that, and there's no reason.
My argument against kind of like the conservative that just wants to go back in time, or the primitivist like Kaczynski, is that era that you're idealizing led to this.
Yes.
So what do you think is going to happen after a long? You might delay, the inevitable, but it's going to come back around to this too. The only way is forward.
And also the idea that there wasn't corruption and like scandal and like horrible things happening in primitive times. Like there's a Donald Glover, also known as Childish Gambino, has a stand-up skit, and I like to reference this a lot because he had a joke that it was very very inspired. He talked about how old people will often be like, back in my day things were great. And a lot of people will talk about that, like, oh, back when in primitive times things were so much simpler. And he's like, well, back in primitive times, someone could come to your village and like kill you, rape your wife, and sell your children into slavery.
Yeah.
And then people would be like, well, it was nighttime.
Yeah.
Things have gotten better.
They're at least in terms of the ability to live a long life.
Long, fulfilled life, and to do more things other than just having to toil on the earth,
And that's one of the main criticisms of Kaczynski that I have also, is that it always eventually evolves into a kind of eugenicism, where you create an ideology where the only solution is that the vast majority of the population dies, and you just kind of cope with that by saying that they shouldn't have been alive in the first place. And that is the logical conclusion, because
that's how you become a Nazi.
Yeah, exactly. That's how you become a fascist. That's how you become a Nazi. And there's no coincidence that there's a lot of, especially in the online spheres, there's a lot of interplay between people who really like Ted Kaczynski and people who really like Hitler. There's a lot of conversation between those two.
Yeah.
Hitler, the notorious vegetarian.
Really?
Yeah, you didn't know that?
I heard. I was reading the other day. He actually said that apparently they were trying to get rid of people with allergies too. Like if you had a nut allergy, you were seen as being inferior, and they didn't want you to spread your seed.
Oh, that's 2 points against me. I'm Italian too.
You're Italian and you have a nut allergy?
Yeah, I wouldn't have lasted long. And I'm a socialist.
Well, they probably would have shot both of us on sight, honestly. But,
Yeah.
but no, yeah. Ted Kaczynski is dead. Rest in peace. Don't do LSD, kids.
It's like watching your childhood dog die of like rabies.
Yeah.
It's like you have to put him down. It's probably better that he's dead, and it wasn't a good thing that he was alive, but you still kind of miss him.
We could say he definitely didn't go out with a bang.
No. not like he would have wanted.
He died not like he lived.
No.
But
well, that's not necessarily true. He lived a lot of his life in a prison cell, and he died in a prison cell.
Well,
so.
I guess that is correct. You're correct. You're correct. He looked about the same as he did coming out as the day he went.
Yeah, yeah.
Man was not much for style
Or hygiene.
I mean,
But I guess soap is a byproduct of technological society.
I suppose so.
It probably corrupts.
I wonder if he got cremated.
I don't know.
Anyways,
I
any other topics for our current event segment?
That's it. That's it for me.
We are just we're awaiting this trial.
Yeah.
We'll have more updates when it's done. I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about.
Yes.
If Trump does go to prison for life,
Mm-hmm.
for the rest of his life, which is probably not going to be much longer, considering he's like almost 80 years old or 80 years old.
Yeah.
No, he's older than Biden. He's like 84, right?
I think he is younger than Biden.
Maybe. Not much longer left.
No.
I'm sure the world will be, or at least the United States will be in disarray that day.
Yes.
And we'll have a lot to talk about.
There will be chaos.